Okay, we're live. Okay, welcome everyone to the REAP webinar on artificial intelligence and how these tools have the potential to revolutionize investor relations. My name is Tom Samuelson. I am one of the presenters and one of the co-founders of REAP. As many of you may know, REAP has had a long history in New Zealand as an application, financial application that served the issuer community and investors in New Zealand since its founding in 2019. REAP recently merged with my company, Braun Network, my old firm, and now has a presence in 7 countries in the Americas and Oceania, Asia. Before we begin, I wanted to mention that we want to encourage questions, all questions. Feel free to type in your questions using the Q&A comment section on the right side of your screen at any time. And so what we're going to do is compile the questions from the webinar from both presentations and from other platforms, because we're also streaming on LinkedIn and another platform. And once the 2 presentations are over, Oliver and I will begin to the Q&A and answer questions as soon as the presentation are over. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our special guest, Oliver Mander. Oliver currently serves as the CEO of the New Zealand Shareholder Association. His career spans several prominent organizations, including key positions at Wellington Water, Chorus, and extensive international career with BP Group. Along with his corporate roles, Oliver has maintained active involvement in New Zealand's financial markets. He has contributed as a regular columnist for the New Zealand Herald and currently serves on the Scout Youth Foundation Investment Committee. Oliver, please begin your presentation as soon as I get the slides up, and welcome.
Thank you very much, Tom, and really appreciate this opportunity today. Look, I thought, we'll talk about the role of AI in investor information, and I'll talk very much from an NZSA perspective, but also just recognize, I'll try to make sure that we bring in what that means in terms of investor relations professionals as well. So if I can have the next slide. So most of you may have heard of or had some interaction with NZSA. We're very much around the investor voice for all investors in New Zealand, and that is in fact our aim, to be that trusted and respected voice. We do represent and advocate on behalf of all investors, and we tend to prioritise public markets because, of course, that's where we can get the biggest bang for buck in terms of our own resource and in terms of the major public benefit. We also want to make sure that markets are fair, that there's a level playing field for both investors, but also that actually has an interface between private and public market as well, and how that actually plays out in practice to ensure that we're optimizing across that sort of capital funding portfolio or capital funding source. Next slide, please. So really over the last 3 to 4 years, NZSA has really focused on these core values, and at the heart of those core values is really relationship. So we work with all stakeholders in the investor community in New Zealand, and our aim is to ensure that we can provide independent, evidence-based, outcome-focused advocacy. We look to be inclusive in how we operate that. So we will talk to everyone to ensure that we can create a truly balanced view of the situation and have the right level of nuance across the reports and assessments that we produce. If I can go to the next slide, please, Tom. So our focus very much in the context of what we're talking about today is how we look at our assessments of the listed companies in New Zealand. So we have full coverage of the NZX in terms of those assessments. And really what we aim to do here is to look at, we have a defined set of policies that are very much based around what we consider to be best practice, both here in New Zealand, but also drawing on international experience and research also. So very much that evidence base coming from the land of academia and corporate research also. So these are the rough areas that we assess against, and each of these has a policy with a series of factors that we will consider in how we assess individual disclosures by listed issuers, but also look at some of them go into the structures of things as well. So for example, if we're talking about CEO remuneration, we're not just looking there for disclosure, we're looking for particular structures because we think that that's in the best interests of shareholders. So over the last 3 years, we've revised all of these policies. We've got 2 left to go, and the other one's marked in italics there that are under review. The first is around CEO remuneration, and we'll look to get a consultation draft or revised policy out before Christmas. And that really follows on from the work that we did last year as part of the Corporate Governance Institute to improve remuneration reporting in New Zealand, and that's resulted in the NZX remuneration reporting template. The audit policies, we'll look to redo those as well. And again, really make sure that all of those policies form a very objective, measurable set of criteria that we can actually assess against in a very objective and evidence-based way. If I can go to the next slide, please. So you can see here the effect that focus on both relationship, but also clarity of policy and a real objective focus on what we can measure. You can see how we think that that's created some improvement in the listed environment in New Zealand. This is what we call our governance quality index. This collates all of those measures that are associated with each of those policies in the previous slide. And that starts to work through and say, okay, well, if we can measure those objectively, it stands to reason that then we can actually produce some form of index around that. And this is what this represents. And we started this approach in early 2021. And you can see how that's improved through the last 3 years to the point where at the end of this year, we think we'll be sort of in that sort of low 70% range. And that's a significant increase from where we started 3 years ago. But again, and this is an environment where, you know, the standards that we expect, of course, and investors expect, they get higher as well. So it's not simply focused on a steady state environment. If I can have the next slide, please. So from an AI perspective, there's probably 4 key areas that we are actively looking at in terms of how we can improve what we do on behalf of New Zealand retail investors. And each of these has implications both for investors, but of course also for investor relations professionals. So it's actually trying to make sure that we can look at how we can help each other in terms of the information that we're looking to collect, how we're collecting that information, and how we're reporting on it. So those 4 key areas really, the first relates to demographics. So at the moment we produce what is a fairly comprehensive report around every listed issuer in New Zealand. In nearly every case, we will have had a conversation with a corporate representative before we publish that report. So there's a lot of detail in that. And I guess the opportunity for NZSA is how can we use AI to actually think about how we can create different levels of reporting or assessment specifically catered to different types of investor demographics. When we talk about efficiency, of course, then that's a very well-known benefit for all of us. And really the key question is here, can we do more with less? So NZSA has reduced its costs in the last 3 to 4 years at the same time as significantly increasing the output that we create. AI for us will form another leg of what we can actually achieve and the benefit that we can provide through to investors. When it comes to scope, our scope at the moment is focused on every NZX listed entity, and it's also looking at some particular specific organizations on the unlisted exchange and occasionally on the ASX as well. We do, of course, have a relationship with the Australian Shareholders Association, who cover around 100 odd companies on the ASX as well. That is actually less than what we cover here with our current processes right now. So we do want to work closely with them to ensure we can have an aligned view trans-Tasman. But actually, is there a way that AI can help that process? In terms of quality, there's at least 250 data points that we're looking at in every annual report or listed company disclosure. That could be in a corporate governance statement, an annual report, or some other form of related disclosure associated with that. Actually, we want to make sure we have the maximum possible assurance for everyone that reflects that we're producing something that's of great quality. And AI for us could be a way of actually looking at that and saying, how can we provide greater assurance to everyone that we're doing a decent job in terms of collecting those data points and the assessments that we're carrying out against them. If I can go to the next slide, please, Tom. Thank you. So as a bit of a sort of practical demonstration of this, and I did consider doing this live, but I thought it would be probably just a bit safer to actually to put this into slides and just see how that translated. So we produced earlier this year in September a 13-page report, including voting intentions for Fletcher Building. It's a very well-known company in New Zealand, probably everyone's favourite from an investor perspective. But really, 13 pages is a pretty tough report to digest, particularly if you're relatively new to investing, or if you're in a demographic that doesn't have that same degree of literacy when it comes to financial or investment capability. So what we've and I guess the first point to note about this is that we did attempt this last year, and I have to say it was a dismal failure. So what you're going to see today is a real reflection of just how far the technology has moved in less than 12 months since we tried to do this last time. So I asked ChatGPT to summarize, and this is based on ChatGPT because it's a really good tool that tends to focus on content editing and writing. So that's different tools do different things. That was the one that we've used to run this little experiment. And you can see it's condensed our 13-page report into 2 pages or page and a half. It's a really useful summary of what the content of that report is saying and the key implications for investors. So that's already an example of how we can use this tool to very easily start to create a different form of reporting to target a new set of investor demographics. From an investor relations perspective, of course, that's really relevant for you, because actually you do have many types of investors. And yes, it's not just the big end of town you've got to worry about. You've got to worry about all your investors and what they're saying on Sharesies as well. So actually, this is a way for investor relations professionals to access and tailor content for different types of investors. The next slide, please. So then what we've tried to do here is say, well, just for example, if I wanted to create a new task, we don't do a lot of media releases as NZSA. We tend to work relatively proactively in terms of what we produce, but we don't actually put a lot of content out in terms of media release. Let's say we did. Well, we can ask ChatGPT to say, can you create a media release in this document? And you can see that's exactly what this has gone away and done. ChatGPT's got a bit of context from NZSA, so it knows that the key thing that we probably want to highlight are the resolutions that and how we're voting on those particular resolutions. So it's created probably a slightly longer media release. Maybe it's a bit longer than we'd normally do, but it's created that very quickly, very easily in a few seconds, and actually it's given us some good bones to work with in terms of if we did want to go and create some media information from our large assessment document, this is what it might look like. The next slide, please. So if we just go back a step, of course, and I mentioned those 250 data points that we're collecting before. So what I've asked ChatGPT to do here is to go away and say, well, if I give you the annual report that I'm looking at, actually, can we have a quick look at our policy file and let's see what you turn up and in terms of an output against that policy. So in reality, at the moment, we have models that do that. We'd go through the same process where we take disclosures and annual reports and we assess those manually, and it does generate a semi-automated output. So I'm essentially asking ChatGPT to replicate a little bit about what we're already doing. And it's put out 3 pages worth of assessment against our policy. That's we sort of that's probably in excess of what the sort of summaries that we would normally create against each of our policy areas. So if I go to the next slide, you can see I have asked ChatGPT to cut it down a bit. And let's say what this looks like for a less experienced investor. I've asked it to give it that score and that rating. In this case, it's come out with a Gramba, pretty reasonable rating in terms of the disclosures around Fletcher Building's CEO remuneration. And that aligns pretty well with what we came up with as well in terms of the disclosure element. But you can see here, then this is probably almost a bit too simple. It's great for a less experienced investor. It's probably a bit simplistic with someone who wants a little bit more information. So then if we go to the next slide, then you can see here, now this looks, and what I've done here is I've actually fed it with a couple of documents that I've written so it can actually replicate my own sort of nuance or tone or writing style in terms of what that looks like. And hey presto, that starts to, if any of you have seen an NZSA assessment report, this starts to look pretty close in terms of what we're actually looking at and how we might express things. There are some limitations to this. It isn't quite right. So, for example, what this report has missed is the fact that we were concerned about the quantum of the incentive related to the total CEO remuneration. We do have a statement in our policy that looks at that, and it provides a framework for measurement, but it doesn't actually, it's giving us a hint about how we might want to structure this policy. So we haven't released this policy yet, so it's already telling me something about how I need to design the policy to make sure that it looks at quantum as well, which was pretty good feedback for us to have. Next slide, please, Tom. So we've gone down to a bit of detail there on a very specific policy area for a specific New Zealand company that we already cover. We, of course, can cross-reference that around what we've actually said about that company. And that's come up in a reasonably good way in terms of actually accessing or assessing exactly how we might think about that as well. So if we think about many New Zealand investors, most New Zealand investors will look overseas. They'll invest well beyond what's available on the NZX. They will invest inside Australia. They will invest in the US. So we don't cover any of that, right? We don't serve New Zealand investors yet in terms of how we're looking at ASX companies or any companies listed on the New York Stock Exchange. That doesn't mean that we can't, and certainly that's the experience with AI. We're in a position potentially to apply our policy framework here in terms of that global best practice. And remember, it is global best practice. It should be, in theory, jurisdiction agnostic. And we can take those policies and actually apply them across a range of other companies, no matter where they are listed. So, for example, we have here the output of a query that we've run across Wesfarmers. That's an ASX-listed company based in Perth. There's a few Kiwis invested in that company. And I've asked it to provide a very simple summary, again, focused for that less experienced investor. And you can see it's actually come out with an answer. It's talked about incentive structures. It's talked about some very specific metrics that we're looking for. So CEO to median pay, STI and LTI metrics, and how those are composed. And it's put the score in there as well, 4 out of 5. So that's the equivalent of when you see an NZSA report, we'll talk about red, amber, green. This is putting a little layer, and then behind the scenes, that's a metric, and of course, this is just putting a little bit of a score across that as well. So it's doing something very similar to what we would do through the models that we currently have today, but applying this across a company that, in theory, I personally know nothing about. This is a company with whom I don't engage. I've never had a conversation with members of that board other than in a social setting. So let's move on to the next slide. When I talk about quality, one of the key areas that we struggle with, or often struggle with, is around the financials that you see in an annual report. And that's not because they're not hard to pick out from the disclosures that we see, and we note the good work that the IAASB is doing in terms of looking at the development and introduction of IFRS 18, and the XRB here in New Zealand has approved that. So we welcome that in terms of quality of presentation, how those presentation layers are making it easier for investors to demystify accounting. But actually, it's still a pretty complex business sometimes. And certainly when we talk about things like underlying profit or underlying metrics, that becomes very difficult from an investor relations perspective. Often that's a story or a narrative that you want to own in terms of how you want those financials to be discussed and considered by investors. At the end of the day, though, what's really important for NZSA is having our own objective measures around that. So that's going beyond the story and saying, okay, how can we make sure that we've got the right numbers? And when we have things like restatements or restated accounts, that becomes pretty tricky. Continuing businesses, discontinued business, the impact on that. So this was our table for Fletcher Building. What I've asked ChatGPT here is just to check the table and along with the associated footnotes and just make sure that that is in fact accurate. And you can see this was a few seconds. It's come back and said that basically we look like we've got accurate figures in the context of the footnotes that clarify discrepancies or changes in basis. It also came back, and I haven't put this in here, but it's come back and also done a deep dive on some of those figures just to really make sure and provide the assurance that what we've got in this table is actually correct and factually correct. So again, this is a way for NZSA to improve the quality of what it does and the services that it provides for investors. Next slide, Tom. So the good news is that this is the last slide, so that I'm really interested to hear if there's any questions here that we can work through. I guess, so in terms of the impact overall that this will have, so I'll start with the NZSA side first. And I think the first key message is that different AI tools have different strengths. So I've used ChatGPT 4 here, and already I can see that difference in what happened last year and what has happened this year. The quality of the output has markedly improved. And that just reflects the change in technology that's occurred in the last 12 months. It is a very fast moving space. The other real different tools will do different things. So if you're talking about video imagery, there's other tools that are better than ChatGPT in terms of how that comes across to users. And Tom will probably highlight a couple of examples that will do different, that do specific different functions in a very powerful way. But for NZSA, what it really highlights is that even more so than it already is, how we design our policies and ensure that what we're looking at are smart objectives, that they're measurable targets that we're looking for, that becomes even more important. So those really clear assessment criteria, that's something that will help the AI engines actually work away and research effectively when they're coming back and trying to pull out an answer. So for investor relations, that kind of is already a hint to how we can think about future disclosures and reporting frameworks. So that clarity and the specific clarity on your disclosures will become even more important in future. So at the moment, we will look at an annual report. We have a degree of nuance and interpretation around that. But if you've got analysts assessing you from all over the world using AI as a tool, actually you want to make sure that your disclosures and reporting are designed in such a way that they can get specific answers to the most common queries that people are asking. And that can be done by a machine, not by a human who has the ability to interpret. For NZSA and others, it means that we're very likely to expand the reach and the quality of what we do. So that reach and quality argument, if it's the argument of being a New Zealand company at the bottom of the world, well, actually, you've just opened up AI will have opened up a world of investors to you that you may not have thought about directly engaging with before. And in terms of some of the limitations of AI, actually the relationship with the investor community, that remains critical. And I gave the example before in Fletcher Building where it didn't pick up on a particular bit of nuance that we heard that we were concerned about. And that concern, it came not just in disclosures, but also looking at how we related to the company as well, and the conversations that we had with the company. So the conversations are valuable because that creates insight for investors that really AI won't be able to replicate, at least not in the short term. So that nuance is still really important. The relationship still becomes really important. And for you as investor relations professionals, actually, that means that actually encourages what you do. It just means you might have to do it in a slightly different way. That's all I've got to say. I'm going to hand back to Tom, and obviously I look forward to any questions as well. Thank you.
Oliver, thank you very much. Really, really great presentation. Again, just if you have any questions, please use the comment box or the question box to the right. We have some accumulated questions from LinkedIn as well. And as soon as I'm done with my presentation, Oliver and I will be back to answer all your queries. So again, welcome everyone. I am going to now discuss specific tools that we've used at REAP, AI-powered tools that we believe can transform your investor relation efforts, can make things more efficient. And some of these tools are pretty cool. We're going to talk about Gamma, which can help you create instant presentations. Flourish, which can take your data and make it look amazing. Claude, which is it's a competitor to ChatGPT, but very specific to some use cases that we brought to it. And then finally, we'll go into REAP and our new feature, which is an amazing AI-driven LLM AIR assistant. So let's, without further ado, let's go to Gamma. So again, as I mentioned, Gamma is a AI tool that you can use to make presentations. And the amazing thing about Gamma is you don't need much. You don't need much to feed it. You can feed it a prompt, a one-line prompt. You could feed it just cut and paste text off of a Word document. You could import a PDF. You can use a URL. And you're about to see some of the things it can do. So In this case, this is a real life case. So we have one of our companies, a New York Stock Exchange listed company called Technoglass. They actually, instead of doing PDFs, they issue their financial statements and press releases on their website in text form. So all we had to do was import the URL from the press release of their third quarter 2024 results. And you will see here instantaneously, without further ado, the presentation that it developed for us was amazing, or for the company Technoglass. Again, record-breaking performance, and then we've got things like financial highlights, which again it took from the presentation. Again, this presentation was obviously a lot more slides than this one. I'm just showing some highlights, and then again using this amazing platform, it came out with again another sort of thing to show the company's strengths. Again, this was done literally from a URL, so a very powerful, very powerful tool. The next we'll go is Flourish. So Flourish again takes raw data and creates amazing visualizations. And that visualizations could be as simple as a line graph, a bar graph, pie charts, stream graphs, any type of sort of visual thing you're looking for. So again, here's data from an Excel spreadsheet with years and populations, whatever. This is an example. And so we go from raw data from an Excel spreadsheet to this instantaneously coming up with a very dynamic chart as well. Again, from the same data coming in with pie charts. So the bottom line is you could take raw data, and normally people can use Excel to do this, but this is a way to make these visualizations even more dynamic with AI using Flourish. So really good one. The next I'm going to talk to you about is Claude. Claude, again, is similar to ChatGPT, but has some real advantages. And in this case, in this sort of case study, we talk about better transcripts. So whether you're based in the US, Europe, South America, New Zealand, everyone has to do their calls. And in the case of, they're doing audio calls, some of them do video calls, and many companies, not all of them, post their transcripts. A lot of companies don't post their transcripts because the transcripts, everyone kind of uses free apps for transcripts. The transcripts come out kind of garbled. They're not perfect, and so a lot of companies will not actually publish the transcripts. But the transcripts are very important because they have investor queries and presentations from management. So one of the tools you can use is Claude, where you can go in. In this case, we took one of our customers one of the largest hotel companies in Mexico. The speakers are not natural English speakers. So some of the information in the transcript is kind of garbled. But what we did was we just went into Claude and say, hey, Claude, fix any grammar issues and improve this call transcript without, very important, without changing content or context. Okay, return only the improved transcript. And so I apologize if it's hard to see, but basically what Claude did instantaneously was take that transcript and fix it grammatically and made it very easy to read and very smooth. So the company was able to take that, create a PDF, and post it on their website, and they'll be doing that going forward. So that's Claude. So now I'm going to jump into Reap. So again, most of you know Reap as the data aggregator for New Zealand companies, now expanding to obviously 7 different countries. And what we're going to talk about specifically is the new feature, which is our AI assistant driven by large language models driven by AI. So the idea of Reap is to connect you with your investors, to allow them to make inquiries, whether it be fundamental inquiries or inquiries about their shareholdings 24/7. So we know that you could have shareholders in other parts of the world, other parts of Asia, in the US. And if they want to make an inquiry because of the time difference, now you have an incredible, powerful assistant that can handle any questions, whether it's the most simple to the most sophisticated in a moment's notice here. So this is, again, the Reap app. And you'll see here we have the fund, in every company that has a profile with us, they have some fundamental data, they have a news feed, and then the innovation is on the lower right of the app. You'll see, in this case, it's Mainframe, which is a company. Ask Mainframe. You'll bring up the AI, and again, you can ask simple questions or more strategic, sophisticated questions. Again, we containerize this information, so we basically eliminate the danger of hallucinations, which is very important, and one of the key reasons that AI has not really infiltrated the financial markets that much is this fear of hallucination. So we have done, a lot of work to eliminate this, building these AIs from the ground up, and each AI is customized. So we don't have a general AI for every company. Every company has their own agent that investors can access. And they can access this not only on the app, but also we give each company the ability to take code, which we have written for them, and then put it on their IR website. So in this case, you have a company, you have the button, the reap button. We'll ask, in this case, Vital, ask the question, open up the AI, and then again, ask whatever question you want to ask, in this case with this company. So the access to the AI is not only just on our app, but can be done right from the corporate website. And we're improving that in the next few months to include other access points with other communications devices. So this is really going to be an incredible innovation for us. And most important thing, and I think Oliver touched on this as well, when we talk about corporate governance compliance, every time there's an inquiry, and our AI goes in and looks at different sources. These are public sources. They could look at 3 documents, 10 documents, 15 documents, and the AI extracts information and formulates a very, very cool answer. Now, we're not a parrot, meaning we don't just take it's a line from the press release. And so the AIs are actually extracting information. And because of that, we have to show our sources from a compliance standpoint, and also to make sure that the user, whether it's a individual investor or a hedge fund or a long-only investor, knows that the information is, without hallucinations. They're comfortable that the information, and we're in improving the sources by also in the future, we're going to be able to give you the page numbers of each of source. So that's another improvement that's coming in the very short term. So to summarize, we believe REAP is transforming investor relations and will continue to transform the investor relations landscape by, very importantly, boosting investor engagement. This is really important. This is what we call storytelling, right? Companies used to depend on brokers and banks with their research reports. That's all gone by the board. And now companies need to be able to tell their story in an unbiased way directly to investors. So boosting this engagement in the 21st and 22nd century using AI, as opposed to, because we know people don't want to read, 40-page reports, 12-page press release. They want to get their information real time. And this is why, for example, trading apps have become so popular over the last few years. People want things instantaneously and easy. Streamlining investor education. Again, an educated investor, that's what you want. You don't want someone that looks at your company as a chart or a number or a option moving up and down. We want to improve your standing with investors by educating them, giving them a real way to understand what your company does. And at the end of the day, the final thing, this is AI in general. Oliver touched on this as well. Optimizing efficiency. All of this automation, okay, especially for companies that have either thousands of shareholders or companies that don't have thousands of shareholders. As you can see, this innovation can help you and free you up to do M&A and other things, and allow our large language models to engage with investors directly and answer 90+% of the questions that they may have that in the past may have not gotten answered. So just before we go to Q&A, just if you're interested, if you're an issuer of any way, if you're a non-New Zealand issuer, if you're Australian or US, you want to inquire, please send an email to sales@reapapp.io. You can go to our website, which is reapapp.io, And for New Zealand issuers, since I know it's Tuesday, but here in the US, it's still Cyber Monday. We're going to give a big discount to all New Zealand issuers in the month of December, 35% off of what we're normally charging. And it's a pretty convenient price. And that's our gift to you, being a company founded in New Zealand. So without further ado, Oliver and I are going to begin to answer some questions. And I'm going to give Oliver the first. I have a question for you, but there's a question from the audience. I don't know if you can see it, Oliver. I'll just read it. There's no mention of ethics, ethical leadership, and ethical culture. This is referenced in the NZX Corporate Governance Code. It is also measurable via the methodology for codes and ethics. So if you want to comment on that, it would be great.
Yep. So I presume that's referring to the list of the policies that we were that I showed in my presentation in terms of those 20 odd areas that we look at today. I think, and AI will give us the opportunity to. A lot of this is down to bandwidth, for number one. So we simply haven't had the resource to actually look at that, or the skill to look at that effectively. AI is a way to help upgrade our capability and capacity to see how we can look at that in a different way. On the flip side, though, I also did reference how important it is in terms of policy design to have clear statements that are accessible and that can be objectively assessed and rated. I am aware of some of the measurement frameworks, and the one that's referenced here as well, the methodology for codes of ethics. We would have to look at those policies, and there are others besides that, and say, how can we make sure that they really are measurable? I mean, I think there's a particular way of creating policy steps that means that technology has to refer to and relate to, and certainly the more specific something is, the easier it is for an AI tool to go away and search. So I do still think there's some work that needs to be done around how we would take those policies and actually make sure they could be assessed in an AI fashion. But look, fundamentally, I have no objection to actually beginning to look at how we consider that in the context of our reports. From a philosophical viewpoint, I think we do need to be a wee bit careful, because one person's good ethic is another person's bad ethic, and so that's more of a social construct than something that becomes an objective assessment. So I think that's a risk associated with that. But fundamentally, at least the best, if there's now a tool or a process that we can use to put information in front of people so they can make their own decisions around things, that's actually totally in line with the ethos that NZSA operates under.
So we have a follow-up question as well. Second part: might it be capable of assessing the application of a company values and reviewing embedded leadership?
If the company values are clearly expressed, yes. If they're not, no. And I think Jane knows, already knows what I'm going to say here. If the answer is no, that should tell us something about how well those company values are expressed. That would in itself create a watch point for us. So I think Jane would probably agree with that statement.
Okay, next question comes from LinkedIn, about asking if are these tools being used? Like how many? If we could put a number on, and that's an easy question, because I just to give you my background, I was a former institutional investor. I was investing for 25 plus years for a large hedge fund in the U.S. Globally. So I've had access to a lot of different markets, a lot of different investor relations, and I could safely say that AI tools. I don't know what goes behind the scene, but in terms of AI tools to I would say the one tool, as Oliver told you, is ChatGPT or these type of Claude. I'm assuming a percentage of IR professionals are using them. I would say that's around, for that particular application, probably more than 10-15%. I think a lot of people are still hesitant because of hallucinations to use them. As far as the other tools I'm mentioning, I'm not so sure. I think people are still doing the old-fashioned way, with Excel spreadsheets and coming up with charts, etc. So I would say that the uses of things like Flourish or even Gamma is very low. I would say less than 3%. And as far as Reap, the ability to create customized large language models embedded in your website or in an app? I would say the answer is less than 1%. So it's a new, as Oliver mentioned, these tools a year ago didn't exist, or they were very crude. 6 months ago, some of them began to come out. Obviously, ChatGPT is about a year and a half old. ChatGPT 6 months ago was really starting to move. But something like Reap, what we're doing, was impossible 6 months ago. Today, with all the tools available and the capabilities and what we've learned, where this is a new thing, and it's catching up by storm, and I think everyone sees tremendous value. So we're still in the infancy in terms of the uses of AI, and I think the main reason, and one of the reasons we went out to solve this problem, is because of hallucinations and fact checking. Right? You still have to fact check ChatGPT even today. You just can't cut and paste, as Oliver could probably tell you. Oliver, are you seeing that as well when your uses of ChatGPT?
Yeah, and look, like I said, it was interesting to me that ChatGPT didn't it wasn't wrong on the facts that it put out on that one example that I've showed today, but it did miss out some of the nuance, and that's something and that may be down to how we're asking the question. So that's that language model, how we're interacting with that language model. So that's almost a training issue or a capability issue. But in some cases, I just don't think it's actually picking up that nuance just yet. Having said that, and again, Tom's already said this, the improvement in capability in the last 12 months has been, look, it's actually usable now. Whereas 12 months ago, at the level of detail that we operate at, it just, when I was doing this, when I attempted this last year, it quoted me back. It found some of my stuff online and was quoting my own report, which defeats the purpose, of course, of what we're actually trying to achieve. So yeah, it's much improved as that particular model. I think we've also seen development of different types of models, and particularly in terms of generation. There's one tool that I've been playing around with that's generated me talking in my voice with my mannerisms, and that's actually quite scary when you think about it. But so there is, and that does become a very ethical conversation in terms of how far do you actually push this, and how
I mean,
far, yeah.
yeah. Before we answer the next question, I want to just reiterate what you're saying. And I think this is going to happen. I don't know if the future is 3 months, 6 months, or 1 year or 2 years, but it's going to happen where people will go into our app, for example, or a ChatGPT or something, where a large language model, and instead of typing, they'll be able to speak into, which you can do today in some of the models. But the big innovation is they'll be able to talk. A video will hop up. For example, let's say your CEO would come up and it would answer the question as the large language model, the query would. So that's going to be the next innovation. So you can have two-way conversations, sophisticated two-way conversations with the actual people that are in the C-suite executives who are. So that's coming in the not too near future. Okay, next question is how can AI interpret vague chair CEO outlook statements? Very good question, and I gave an example of this. One of the key things with any of these large language models, whether it's Claude, ChatGPT, or even Reap, is how the question is presented, the query itself. The more details you can give on your query, the better and more accurate it's going to be. So one of the things you saw we did with that transcript, which is, I guess, similar to what you're saying, is when you say vague statements, maybe about the future guidance or whatever, we can't really change the context of the statement, but we can sort of go in and say, hey, Claude, can you reword this without changing the context and make it smoother, make it more grammarly? Those type of things we can do, but we cannot change. We have to make sure that the whatever AI platform we're using does not change the context. One of the things that happens in Reap, and this is very interesting, is we have our whole system is automated. So as a company, you come out with a press release, a financial statement, whatever it is, it gets automatically sent to us either through an API or through one of our AI crawlers. It'll come into our app. It will get reformatted without changing any context into the Reap format and appear instantaneously on the app. That information, that new information, then gets fed into our other AI. So we have one AI teaching another AI. that's where things get very interesting. And for some people, they're worried about it, but I think that the whole idea is if you can containerize like we've been able to do and not have leakage out to the internet, you can interpret statements that may be vague for some people, but without changing the context. And that's the key to any of these AIs, is not having the context change and not leaking out into the internet. Oliver, we have a question from one of the platforms, just on the importance of corporate governance in this world of ESG. How much do you think investors are really focused on this issue in terms of corporate governance in relation to ESG?
Not enough. Look, great governance leads to great performance in the long term. That is something that has been proven the world over. It doesn't matter what jurisdiction you're in. Um, uh, and that's a long-term trend. So, if you invest in good companies that are governed well, then you are more likely over time to create a greater than average return from that investment into the long term. So actually, the things that we look at focused around corporate governance, that should be a critical factor for all investors. And how that gets made transparent, accessible, put in formats that make sense for every investor. They should be just as interested in that as what the share price has done over the last week, which I know captures the imagination of many newer or more inexperienced investors. But it has been traditionally a very difficult thing to put that into a format that makes it fun for people. Well, I think that's about to change. And certainly we'll be giving that a good crack heading into next year.
Absolutely. Another question is, what is the cost of REAP? Well, very simple. So I can't give you a set cost because we do have different tiers, and that's based on a couple things. This is obvious. For example, companies in the Western Hemisphere, US, Latin America, Canada, they report 4 times a year. A lot of countries in Asia only report 2 times a year. So obviously there's less information. Also, it's dependent on market cap. So obviously some large cap companies produce reams of information, almost a press release. We have one company in Brazil, literally they put out a press release every day. It's incredible. And then there are some companies don't. So we assess that. We don't have too many tiers, but if you reach out to us, we certainly can give you a pricing that makes sense. And we think our pricing is extremely reasonable given what we're doing. And I have another follow-up here. How long does it take to set up the AI agents? Once you're set up on the app, which most New Zealand companies already are, the AI agent takes within 48 hours, we could have it ready for you. And then we have what we do is we have a list of questions that were given to us by institutional investors, high level questions. You return that and we ingest all of that, and then your AI is ready to go live. And so within 48 hours, we can have it up and running in the app and on your website as well, because we give you the code to do it. Any other questions? Oh, well, I don't see any more questions, Oliver. So listen, I want to thank you very much for your participation. I know we'll be doing other things together, and I think what you're doing is really, really important on the corporate governance side. And I think you have the ability to expand that to other countries. And there are a lot of countries, a lot of investors that hope that you would expand that into other countries. But again, thank you very much for your participation in this webinar.
Thank you.
And thanks everyone for participating. Again, reapapp.io. Go to the website and ask us a question. Thanks again, Oliver.